Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Werewolf Saved My Life. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've told this story maybe 3 times in 40 years, and each time people look at me like I've lost my mind. Well, maybe I have, but I'm in my 70s now. My knees creak when I stand up. I figure it's time to set the record straight about what I saw in those Michigan woods back in 1992. You want to know about monsters? Real ones, not the kind that haunt horror movies or campfire tales. I'm talking about something that shouldn't exist. Something that defies every rational explanation I've spent decades trying to construct. It wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of those. It wasn't a man in some elaborate costume either. It wasn't my imagination running wild from too much whiskey and too little sleep. What I encountered that night in the woods was something else entirely. Picture this. A creature standing about 8 feet tall, its massive frame silhouetted against the dying embers of my campfire. Dark, coarse fur, covering every inch of its powerfully muscled body. The kind of fur that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. The head was elongated like a wolf's, but broader, more intelligent somehow. When it opened its mouth, I could see fangs that gleamed like polished ivory in the flickering light. Each one sharp enough to tear through flesh and bone without much effort. But those eyes still wake me up some nights. Amber coals burning in the darkness, ancient and knowing. They weren't the mindless stares of a wild animal. There was intelligence in those eyes. Maybe even compassion. When those eyes locked onto mine, I felt like I was looking into something that had walked this earth for far longer than any of us had a right to expect. The hands, though, they still haunt me. They weren't quite human, and they weren't quite animal. Long fingers that could have been a man's, if men had fingers that ended in razor-sharp claws capable of shredding through bark and bone alike. The way it moved was predatory, utterly silent despite its enormous size. Every step seemed calculated, purposeful, like it could choose to be invisible if it wanted to. Some folks might call this a dogman, others a werewolf. The old-timers from Louisiana might whisper about the loup-garou or the rougarou. Native Americans might speak of skinwalkers, though I've always been careful about using that term. It seems to carry weight I don't think I have the right to claim. I don't know what name fits what I saw, but I do know this. It was real. It was there. And it changed everything I thought I knew about what is possible. The thing is, I'm not some wild-eyed conspiracy theorist. I was an accountant, for crying out loud. 37 years of balancing books, filing taxes, living the most ordinary life that you could imagine. I believe in facts, figures, things that make sense on paper. But sometimes life throws you a curveball that's so far outside the strike zone that you can't understand why you're taking a swing at it. So let me start from the beginning, from that night in the forest when everything I thought I knew about the world got turned upside down. Because the most important thing you need to understand is this. Sometimes, the monsters are the ones who save you. It was 1992. I was in my 40s, nursing a broken heart after Sarah left me for her yoga instructor. I needed solitude, so I headed to Michigan's Upper Peninsula, deep in the Hiawatha National Forest, where nobody would find me. It was a perfect spot, a small clearing surrounded by ancient maples and oaks, their autumn colors bleeding gold and orange against the sky. I kept it simple, a domed tent, a fire ring, supplies for 2 nights. The isolation was exactly what I needed. Spent the day hiking, reading by the fire, feeling human again for the first time in months. By sunset, everything felt okay, natural, safe. I could hear the normal forest sounds, owls calling, small animals rustling through the undergrowth. Looking back, I probably should have paid attention when it got quiet, Around 10 o'clock, the owls stopped first. Then, everything else faded until there was nothing but wind and my dying fire. Even the insects went silent, like the entire forest was holding its breath. A little after 10 p.m., I was banking the fire for the night when I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling my camp just outside the ring of firelight. Too purposeful to be an animal, too aggressive to be anything friendly. "I can see you in there," the voice came from the darkness, harsh, edged with something that made my skin crawl. I tried being neighborly. "Good evening. Can I help you with something?" He stepped into the light then, and my blood went cold. Gaunt face, wild eyes, clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks. But it was the nervous energy, the way his hands kept twitching, that told me this wasn't about borrowing matches or asking directions. "Yeah, you can help me," his smile revealed yellowed teeth. "Start with your wallet, then your truck keys." I complied, hoping to diffuse things. I tossed my wallet onto the ground between us, the keys beside it. "Take whatever you need, man, no problem." But his agitation only increased. He paced, muttering to himself, and that is when his knife appeared, a long, wicked blade that caught the firelight like a promise of violence. "Move away from the fire," he ordered, gesturing toward the dark tree line. "Over there." That was when I knew. This wasn't a robbery. This was something far worse, and my compliance meant I'd never see morning. My mind raced through the options, and all of them ended badly. He was between me and my truck. He was armed. He was clearly unstable. "Please," I said, backing toward the trees. "You've got my money, my keys. What else do you want?" His laugh was the sound nightmares make. "What else?" "Well, friend, that depends on how much noise you plan to make." The knife rose, and time slowed to a crawl. I was maybe 10 seconds from becoming another missing person statistic, another unsolved case file gathering dust. The darkness behind me seemed to whisper promises of a quick and anonymous passing. I was out of options. I was out of time. I was out of luck. And then, the forest exploded. Something massive crashed through the undergrowth behind me, and both of us froze. Branches snapped like gunshots. Leaves rustled like thunder. And then, silence. Silence so quiet it makes your ears ring. What the hell, the intruder started to say, and that is when it emerged. The creature burst from the tree line, like something out of humanity's oldest nightmares. 8 feet of corded muscle and dark fur, rising to its full height with a motion that defied its size. Those amber eyes burned in the firelight, fixed on the man with the knife. My would-be attacker stumbled backward, his weapon suddenly looking like a child's toy. "What is that thing?" he asked. The creature answered, with a sound I'll never forget. It bared fangs that could have torn a man in half, and I understood with perfect clarity that I was witnessing something that shouldn't and couldn't exist. The intruder's survival instincts finally kicked in. He slashed wildly with his knife, but the creature moved like liquid shadow, always just out of reach. It could have ended his life in seconds. Those claws could have opened him up like a can of soup. But instead, the Dogman chose restraint. This wasn't about ending his life. This was about sending a message. And I do believe that message was received. After maybe 30 seconds of the most one-sided battle I've ever witnessed, the intruder broke. Terror overcame whatever criminal intentions had brought him into my camp, and he ran screaming like a little girl into the night. I could hear him crashing through the forest for several minutes, branches breaking, his panicked voice growing fainter until it disappeared entirely. And then, it was just me and the Dogman. It turned those intelligent amber eyes on me, and I felt something I'd never experienced before or since. A moment of perfect understanding between two beings that should have been natural enemies. There was no hunger in that gaze, no threat, just assessment and curiosity. I started to say thank you, but the moment I spoke, it was gone. 1 second it stood there, this impossible guardian that had just saved my life. And the next, there was only space and the whisper of displaced air. It melted back into the forest as silently as it had emerged, leaving me alone with my dying fire, and a head full of impossible memories. The normal sounds returned gradually. Insects, owls, the rustle of small creatures going about their nightly business. As if nothing had happened. As if the last 5 minutes hadn't rewritten everything I thought I knew about the world. I packed up that night, and I drove home in a daze. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that. I couldn't shake the image of those burning eyes, or the sound of that otherworldly roar. I researched everything I could find about cryptids, about folklore, about unexplained sightings of the Dogman. I found stories that matched pieces of what I'd experienced, but nothing that captured the full truth of that encounter. Like I said, I've told this story just a few times in 4 decades. Each time, I see the doubt in people's faces. I see their polite skepticism, and I can't say I blame them. If somebody told me this story, I'd probably think they'd been drinking too much around the campfire. But I do know what I saw, and I do know what saved my life that night. Sometimes I wonder why it helped me. Was it territorial in protecting its domain from human violence? Was it simple opportunity, a chance to drive off a threat without revealing itself to the outside world? Or was there something deeper, some ancient compact between man and the wild things that most of us have forgotten? I don't suppose I'll ever know. What I do know is that somewhere in those Michigan woods, there's a guardian that chose to step out of the shadows when a stranger needed help. It didn't have to. It could have let nature take its course, let one human problem solve itself in the most brutal way possible. But instead, it chose mercy. Some folks say there are no such things as monsters. I'm here to tell you they're wrong. But sometimes, just sometimes, the monsters are the ones who save you, and that realization changes everything about how you see the world, how you move through it, how you treat the dark spaces where impossible things might still be waiting. I never saw anything like that ever again, and I'm not sure I'd want to either. But I'm grateful every day that I saw it once. Grateful for the reminder that this world still holds mysteries, still harbors guardians in the deep woods, still makes room for the impossible to break through when someone needs the impossible the most. Well, that's my story. Believe it or don't. But keep your eyes open when you're alone in the wild places. You never know what might be watching from the shadows, waiting for its moment to step into the light.
Team Team Dogman is back, embroidered classic black. Team Dogman, embroidered hat, it's the hat, that's where it's at. It went away, but now it's returned. The hat that tells the world you're on Team Dogman. Order yours now. Link is in the description. Warning, wearing a Team Dogman hat does not ensure that Dogman won't eat you.
The Encounter at High Knob Overlook. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm an older listener to your channel. My hair has been white for over a decade. I'm still in fairly good shape for my age though, and so I decided I wanted to hike up to see High Knob Overlook in Pennsylvania for one last time. I used to visit the site every few years with my late wife Belinda, but since her passing I'd been growing increasingly less active. My friends began to worry about me, and so this is why I decided to hike up this mountain. If I had known I would come face to face with an 8 or 9 foot tall hairy dog-headed beast man, I'm pretty sure I would have just stayed home. I had never felt afraid at High Knob Overlook or on any of the paths leading up to it. Sure, it's a steep drop down the side, but I never had any plans of falling, so I felt I had nothing to fear. This was the first and only time I had gone there alone, and I have to admit that the vibe was very different from the instant I showed up. It felt like someone or something was watching me, and I couldn't shake that bad energy either. I was kind of paranoid even before the incident itself happened. Suddenly I was pulled out of my deep thoughts of emotional pain and loss, and I was thrust headlong into a nightmare of possible real pain and permanent loss of everything. But my encounter with the Dogman was a true encounter, one in which we both came away learning an awful lot about each other. But let me start the story at the beginning, otherwise it just won't make any sense. The decision came on a Tuesday morning as I stared at Belinda's hiking boots, still sitting by the door 2 years after her passing. They were faded blue Merrells with frayed laces that she refused to replace. They're just getting comfortable, she would always say. I packed lightly. My doctor would have disapproved, but some journeys are worth the risk. As I locked my front door, Mrs. Henderson from next door peered through her curtains with that worried look she'd worn since becoming a self-appointed guardian after Belinda passed away. Just a day hike, Eleanor, I called out, faking more vigor than I actually felt. The drive to the trailhead was meditative. Radio off, windows down, the scent of pine trees growing stronger as I wound up the mountain roads. The parking lot held only 2 other cars when I arrived at 7:30 a.m. That was good for me. I'd have the trail mostly to myself. The first mile wasn't so bad. A gentle ascent through hardwood forest. My knees complained, but my hiking poles took the edge off. Strange how muscle memory works. My body remembered the rhythm of those slopes despite the years away. As the trail steepened, the woods quieted. No bird calling, no rustling in the underbrush. Just the crunch of gravel beneath my boots and my own labored breathing. A young couple passed me heading downward, nodding politely with that look of mild surprise at seeing someone with hair as white as mine up this high. "There's a beautiful view at the top," the young woman offered. "I know," I replied. "I've been there many times." By the 3rd mile, the familiar ridge came into view. My pace slowed as memories flooded back. Belinda pointing out red-tailed hawks circling below us, unpacking sandwiches on sun-warmed rocks, her laughter echoing across the valley when I pretended to almost fall. I paused at a familiar bend, a usual resting spot, and that's when I first sensed it, a heaviness in the air. A feeling of being observed. Not the comfortable solitude of nature, but something watchful, something waiting. I was lost in memories when it happened. One moment I was alone on the narrow path. The next, I wasn't. Around the bend, not 30 feet ahead where the trail hugged the mountainside, stood something impossible. My mind scrambled to categorize what my eyes were seeing. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, covered in coarse dark fur. But it was the head that froze me, unmistakably canine, with a long snout and pointed ears that swiveled toward me the instant I appeared. A wolf's head on a hairy man's body. This was the Pennsylvania Dogman. Our eyes met, and time suspended. His were amber, intelligent, and utterly wild. In that moment, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I was looking at the end of my life. My heart stuttered painfully in my chest. The creature's nostrils flared, scenting me on the mountain's breeze. It dropped momentarily to all fours with frightening grace, but then rose again to its full height, shoulders hunched, hackles raised. A low growl vibrated the air between us, and I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. There was nowhere to run. To my left, the mountain rose in a steep incline. To my right, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. Behind me, too far to matter. Ahead, only the Dogman. My hiking poles clattered to the ground from nerveless fingers. As the creature took its first deliberate step toward me, some primal instinct made me raise my hands, palms outward. "Wait," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Please, just wait." The Dogman hesitated, head tilting slightly. In that brief pause, I made what I thought would be my final decision. If I was going to pass away on this mountain, I would do so speaking. Not screaming. Not begging. Speaking. "My name is Tom," I began, each word measured and clear. "I'm 64 years old. I was born in Pittsburgh. I lived there most of my life." The dogman's ears twitched, but he did not advance. Instead, he straightened slightly, watching me with unnerving intensity. "I came up here today because of my wife Belinda." My voice cracked on her name. "She loved this place. We must have come here a dozen times in 38 years. She passed away 2 years ago. It was a sickness." The creature took another step forward and I tensed, but I continued speaking. "She and I met in college. I was studying engineering. She was in art history. Couldn't have been more different, but somehow it worked. I remember smiling in spite of everything. She could name every wildflower on this mountain. I can't name a single one, but I remember how excited she'd get finding them." Something shifted in the dogman's posture, a subtle relaxing of its shoulders, though those amber eyes never left mine. "We never had children. Maybe that was a mistake, but we had each other. We had this mountain." I gestured vaguely at the landscape around us. "This was sort of like our cathedral." I'm not sure what possessed me to keep talking, to share my life with this animal, but each word seemed to hold it at bay. So I continued, telling this monster about Belinda's paintings, about our tiny garden at home, and how I'd stopped living when she stopped breathing. "And now I'm here one last time," I concluded. "I just wanted to see it again, to feel close to her. That's all." The dogman made a sound then, not exactly a growl, something more complicated. It took a half step back, head cocked to one side curiously. That's when things changed. The creature began pacing, agitated movements back and forth across the narrow trail. Its breathing quickened, harsh pants that steamed in the mountain air. It would look at me, then away, then look back again. "Are you all right?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. The dogman let out a sound I can only describe as a whine, high-pitched and distressed, coming from deep in that massive chest. It slapped a clawed hand against the rock face beside the trail, leaving deep gouges in the stone. I should have probably been terrified, but curiosity was beginning to overcome my fear. This wasn't the behavior of a predator that was about to strike. This was something else entirely. "I don't understand what you need," I said softly, "but I don't mean you any harm. I'm just trying to pass through." The creature's agitation intensified. It began to sniff the air frantically, turning its head toward the valley below, then back to me. It took 2 quick steps toward me, and I braced myself, but then it stopped, throwing its head back with sounded like almost frustration. "Please," I said, dropping all pretense of bravery, letting my fear show. "I have nothing left but this one last climb. Please just let me pass." The dogman's ears flattened against its skull. It looked down the path behind me, then up toward the overlook, then directly in my eyes. Something in those inhuman eyes seemed to be calculating, deciding. I stood perfectly still, waiting for judgment from a creature I hadn't believed existed until moments prior. And in that stillness, I felt strangely at peace. If this was how it was going to end, well, at least it would end here, on the mountain that Belinda loved. The dogman's muscles tensed, bunching beneath that dark fur. I closed my eyes, waiting for the impact. Claws, teeth, whatever end this creature would bring to me. But instead, I felt a rush of air and heard a heavy thud behind me. When I opened my eyes, the dogman had leaped clear over me. It landed with surprising grace for something so large, momentarily crouched on all fours, before rising again to its full 8 or 9 foot height. Now it stood between me and the way I had come, effectively switching our positions on the trail. For several heartbeats, we stared at each other. The creature's ears were no longer flat against its head, and its posture had changed, less threatening, almost wary. Then it did something I still struggled to explain. It nodded at me. one deliberate dip of that massive canine head. Before I could process what had just happened, the dogman turned and loped down the trail, disappearing around the bend within seconds. The silence that followed felt unreal, broken only by my breathing and the distant cry of a hawk. My legs gave out and I sank to the ground, trembling. The adrenaline that had kept me standing drained away, leaving me weak and disoriented. Had I imagined that? A stress-induced hallucination brought on by grief and altitude? But the deep gouges in the rock face remained, undeniable evidence that what had just occurred had really occurred. I don't know for how long I sat there, minutes or perhaps an hour, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why had it spared me? What was it doing on this mountain in the first place? Had others encountered it before? I thought of all the folklore I dismissed over the years, the stories from rural communities about creatures in the woods that defied explanation. Could those stories have actually been true? Eventually, I gathered my hiking poles and forced myself to stand. My legs shook, but held. The overlook was still ahead, my original destination. I could turn back, the rational choice after such an encounter. Or I could continue forward. I chose forward. Each step was an act of defiance against fear, against age, against the strangeness that had nearly consumed me. The trail felt different now, charged with significance I couldn't articulate. The trees around me seemed more watchful, the shadows deeper, the sunlight more precious. As I hiked the remaining distance to High Knob Overlook, I replayed that encounter in my mind. What struck me most wasn't the creature's appearance, although that was certainly seared into my memory. It was the intelligence in those amber eyes. This wasn't a mindless beast. Whatever the dogman was, it had understood me on some level. Perhaps not my words specifically, but certainly my vulnerability, my purpose in being there. And something about my story had resonated. When I spoke of Belinda, of loss, of one final journey, that was when its demeanor had changed. Was it possible this creature knew grief? Had it experienced losses of its own? The thought was simultaneously comforting and disturbing. Comforting to imagine a connection between species so different, but disturbing to consider what kind of existence such a creature might lead. Alone? Were there others? Did they have families, communities? The questions multiplied with each step I took. I remembered the agitation that the dogman had shown. At first I had interpreted it as aggression, but looking back it seemed more like distress, as though it were caught between instinct and something else. Something almost like empathy. The trail narrowed further as I approached the overlook, with switchbacks that required careful footing. I found myself checking over my shoulder more frequently, half expecting to see that towering figure again. But I was alone once more, or at least I appeared to be. A young chickadee flitted between branches near the path, unconcerned by my presence. Its ordinary wildness was a balm after the extraordinary encounter I'd just survived. Nature continued its rhythms, indifferent to the upheaval in my understanding of the world. I thought of Belinda again, wondering what she would have made of all this. She'd always been more open to the unexplained than I was. "The world is stranger than we know, Tom," she'd say whenever I dismissed stories of the paranormal. And thank goodness for that. If she were here, she'd probably be sketching the dogman from memory, trying to capture those intelligent eyes. The absurdity of my situation suddenly struck me, and I found myself laughing. A strange, somewhat hysterical sound that echoed off the rocks. Here I was, a 64-year-old widower, who just had a close encounter with a cryptid, and I was continuing my hike as though nothing had happened. But what else could I do? Who would even believe me? My neighbor Eleanor would have me committed if I told her this story. My doctor would blame it on dehydration. My few remaining friends would exchange worried glances and suggest I moved into assisted living. No, this experience was mine alone to carry. Just as the grief for Belinda was mine alone, so too was this strange gift, for I was beginning to see it as a gift rather than a trauma. I had faced the end of my life twice now, once in the slow agonizing months of Belinda's illness, and again today in the sudden shocking form of the Dogman. Both times, I had emerged changed. The first had left me diminished, a partial person navigating a world that no longer made sense to me. But this second brush with mortality felt different. I had stood before something ancient and powerful. I had spoken my truth, and then I had been spared. But why? The question haunted me as I climbed. Had the creature recognized something in me, a fellow traveler on a solitary journey? Had my words broken through some barrier between our species? Or was it simply not hungry, not threatened enough to attack? I'll never know for certain, but I found myself leaning toward the more meaningful interpretation. In the most primal moment of fear, I had chosen vulnerability. I had shared my heart with a predator, and somehow, it mattered. The trail began to level out as I approached the overlook. My breathing was labored, less from exertion than from emotion. I could see glimpses of the valley through the trees, the vast panorama that had drawn Belinda and me back so many times. When I finally emerged onto the rocky outcropping of High Knob Overlook, the familiar view spread before me like a benediction. Mile upon mile of rolling mountains, forest green, giving way to blue haze at the horizon. The vastness that had always made our human concerns seem manageable. I found the exact spot where Belinda and I had always sat, a flat rock near the edge, with just enough room for two. Now I sat alone, my pack beside me instead of my wife. The afternoon light bathed the valley in gold, exactly as she had painted it so many times. You wouldn't believe what happened on the way up, Lynn, I said aloud, using my old nickname for her. The wind carried my words away, but it felt right to speak them. Remember all those cryptid stories you used to read? Well, it turns out you were onto something. I unpacked my small lunch of a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, the same meal I had always had at the summit. As I ate, I scanned the forest below, half expecting to see a glimpse of something large moving through the trees, but there was only the normal movement, birds in flight, branches swaying in the wind. What struck me most powerfully, sitting there alone after my strange encounter, was how much larger the world suddenly seemed. For 2 years since Belinda's death, everything had contracted. My daily routines, my circle of friends, my willingness to engage with life, all had shrunk to a manageable size that required minimal courage. But now I had stood face to face with the inexplicable, and I had survived. The world had suddenly expanded again, become wild and unpredictable, and gloriously, terrifyingly alive. I took out the small metal container from my pack, the one containing a portion of Belinda's ashes that I'd been saving for this moment. We had scattered most of her in the garden among her beloved flowers, but she had made me promise to bring some here, to let the wind take me from our mountain, as she'd put it. My hands were steady as I opened the container and I stood at the edge of the overlook. I kept my promise, Lynn, I whispered, and I'm still here, still finding wonders in this world, just like you said I would. I released my wife's ashes into the wind, watching them catch the light as they drifted out over the valley. For the first time since her passing, I wept without restraint, not just for loss, but for life, with all its impossible mysteries. Hey everybody, I'm happy to say our newest channel member is Heather Gray. Please join me in welcoming our newest channel member, Heather Gray. We're finally putting up some new secret members-only stories this coming week, and Heather will get to watch every one of them. The Dogman of Shaunie Cliff. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I want to tell you the story of my poodle Punch and the dogman who saved his life. It's over 3 decades later, and just looking at an old photo of Punch and his corkscrew curls and his intelligent eyes can still bring back everything in a rush. He was my oversized poodle, not quite standard-sized, but larger than most miniatures, with his dignified bearing that made even the neighborhood German shepherds give him space. I remember his chocolate brown fur. I remember how it felt beneath my fingers when I'd bury my face in his neck after a bad day of school. Some dogs are just dogs. Punch was something more. He was my confidant during those turbulent teenage years when it felt like no one else understood. He was my protector on late-night walks when I needed to escape the house. He was my connection to joy when everything else felt complicated. But I don't like to look at my old pictures of Punch for too long. It's not that Punch makes me uneasy. It's what happened that May afternoon in 1990 when I was 17 years old. The memory still visits me in dreams. The cliff face at Shaunie State Park, Punch's desperate scramble, and the gray figure that emerged from nowhere to save him. But mostly I remember what came after, the stones flying through the air, the hateful words, the fear transforming ordinary teenagers into something unrecognizable. Even now, decades later, I still don't understand how kindness could be met with cruelty. This girl from my school was telling me I should totally go to this party. She wasn't exactly my friend. She was more like a kind of popular girl who occasionally acknowledged my existence when it suited her, like when she needed people to show up for a party. She told me everyone's going to be there, and I was thinking about it. A secret Cinco de Mayo party at Shaunie? She told me it was senior tradition. No parents, no rules, just us celebrating before graduation. And then she told me that Travis would be there. My cheeks flushed. Travis was a boy that had occupied an embarrassing amount of my daydreams that year. I still hesitated. Social gatherings weren't exactly my strong suit. But then Melissa explained to me. She said I spend too much time with my dog and not enough with people. She sounded sort of halfway between concerned and condescending and impatient, you know? Just come, she told me. For once, be a normal human. The word normal and the word human hit like they always did, a reminder that I existed on the periphery to these people. Can I bring Punch? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Melissa rolled her eyes. Seriously? It's not a dog park. He's well behaved. Better than most of the guys who will be there, I said, trying to make it sound like a joke. Whatever. Just make sure he doesn't cause trouble. She pushed away from the locker. Saturday noon, park at the main lot and follow the trail markers with the red ribbons. After she walked away, I stood there conflicted. Part of me desperately wanted to belong, to be included in senior memories before we all scattered after graduation. But another part knew I'd feel more comfortable with Punch by my side. That Friday night, I lay in bed with Punch curled against my feet, his warm weight grounding me as I stared at the ceiling. Well, what was the worst that could happen? I'd be uncomfortable for a few hours and then I'd leave. At least I could say I went. What do you think, buddy? I whispered. Punch lifted his head, ears perked forward, as if considering the question carefully. Then he scooted up to bed to lick my face once, before settling his head on my pillow. Saturday morning I packed a small backpack, water bottles, snacks for both of us, a light jacket in case it got cool. I clipped Punch's leash to his collar, though I rarely needed it. He'd been trained to stay close since he was a puppy. We're just going to check this thing out, I told him as we climbed into my ancient Honda Civic. First sign of any trouble, and we're out of there. Punch woofed softly from the passenger seat, his brown eyes watching me with what I always imagined was understanding. As we pulled away from the house, heading toward Bedford County's most popular state park, I had no way of knowing that trouble would take a form neither of us could have possibly expected. We arrived at the crowded celebration where Punch quickly became everyone's favorite party guest. But it didn't take long for something to go wrong. One moment Punch was contentedly lounging beside me on a picnic basket as I half listened to Travis's stories about his college plans. And the next, Punch's head snapped up, ears fully alert. Punch? I questioned, noticing the sudden change in his demeanor. Before I could grab his collar, he bolted, a brown streak cutting through the crowd of teenagers, sending solo cups flying and causing startled yelps. I'd never seen him move so fast, with such single-minded determination. "Punch! Stop!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet, heads turned as I pushed through the gathering, apologizing hastily while trying to keep my dog in sight. Travis called something after me, but his voice was lost in the confusion. The bird that had caught Punch's attention was a flash of bright blue, an indigo bunting I'd later realize, flitting just beyond his reach, always staying maddeningly close. Punch wasn't typically a chaser, which made his behavior all the more alarming. Something about this particular bird had awakened a primal instinct I'd never witnessed in him before. The terrain changed as I followed, moving from the relatively flat area where the party was being held into rockier and more dangerous ground. My sneakers slipped on those loose stones, and branches clawed at my arms. The sound of music and laughter faded behind me, replaced by the rustle of leaves and my own labored breathing. "Punch! Come here! Come!" I called desperately, my voice climbing in panic. We were approaching an area of the park I'd never visited before, where warning signs marked dangerous cliffs and unstable ground. My stomach tightened with dread as Punch continued his relentless pursuit, the gap between us widening despite my best efforts. And then I saw it happen. The bird swooped low over the edge of a cliff, and without hesitation, Punch followed, sailing through the air in a graceful arc that seemed to hang in slow motion. My scream tore through the forest. "Punch!" The momentum of my run nearly carried me over the edge, too. I skidded to a halt, stones and dirt cascading beneath my feet and disappearing into the void beyond. For one horrible moment, I thought he was gone, that I'd just witnessed the end of my best friend over a stupid bird. Dropping to my hands and knees, I crawled the final few feet to the cliff edge, terrified of what I'd see when I looked down. My heart hammered so violently I could feel it in my throat, making it difficult to breathe. When I finally summoned the courage to peer over the edge, the relief was so intense it made me dizzy. About 15 feet down, Punch had somehow landed on a narrow outcropping. The ledge was barely wider than his body, and beyond it was nothing but a sheer drop of at least 100 feet to the jagged rocks below. He had managed to catch himself on a stunted tree growing horizontally from the cliff face, his front paws wrapped around it, while his back legs scrambled for purchase on the crumbling ledge. His eyes, when they met mine, held a look of pure terror that I had never seen before. A realization that he had made a terrible mistake, and he had no way to undo it. "It's okay, buddy," I called down, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic threatening to overtake me. "Just stay still. I'm gonna get help." But even as I said it, I knew the grim truth. We were far from the main party. We were out of earshot, and I had no idea how I'd get down to him or how I'd carry him back up. My phone was in my backpack, left behind in my rush to chase after him. And by the time I ran back to get help, the precarious ledge supporting Punch might have given away already. I glanced around desperately, looking for a path down or anything I could use as a rope. Nothing. The cliff face was nearly vertical, with few handholds, impossible to climb down without any equipment, at least for me. The sound of crumbling rock drew my attention back to Punch, who whimpered as a piece of his ledge broke away and plummeted down. "Don't move," I shouted, tears now streaming freely down my face. "Please, Punch, please just don't move." I lay flat on my stomach, extending my arms as far as they would go, but the distance was much too great. Even if I dangled over the ledge, a suicidal idea given the unstable ground, I still wouldn't be able to reach him. For the first time in my young life, I felt completely helpless, watching as my beloved dog clung to life by his paws, with nothing I could do but bear witness to whatever happened next. The first sign that we weren't alone was a shower of small pebbles cascading from somewhere to my right. I turned, expecting to see another teenager from the party who'd followed the commotion. What I saw instead stopped my breath entirely. A figure was moving along the cliff face about 30 feet away, navigating the sheer rock with impossible ease. At first my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It looked like a man, but it moved like something else entirely. Each movement was precise, like a creature born to scale vertical surfaces. It, or he, was covered in coarse gray fur that caught the afternoon sunlight in silver highlights. I froze, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and disbelief, as the figure traversed horizontally across the cliff, moving steadily toward where Punch clung desperately to his diminishing perch. The creature was humanoid, but unmistakably not human, looking humanoid, though with a canine head, elongated limbs, and fingers tipped with claws that dug into the rock face with each deliberate movement. A dogman. Like something out of a campfire story or a local legend, yet undeniably real before my eyes. I should have been terrified, and part of me was, but my concern for Punch overrode everything else. The strange being had nearly reached my dog, who was now whimpering continuously as more of his ledge crumbled away beneath his back paws. "Be careful with him," I found myself saying, my voice barely above a whisper. As if hearing me despite the distance, the dogman's pointed ears twitched in my direction. Then, with one powerful movement, he maneuvered below Punch's position and secured himself against the cliff with his lower limbs, freeing his upper arms. I held my breath as the creature reached up toward my trembling dog. Punch, surprisingly, did not growl or snap. Instead, he went completely still as the dogman carefully worked one clawed hand under his belly and the other around his chest. With remarkable gentleness, the creature detached Punch from the branch and cradled him against his own body. For a moment they remained there, my chocolate poodle secured against the chest of a myth come to life. Then, the dogman began to climb again, moving upward with the same grace despite now carrying almost 40 pounds of a frightened dog. I scooted back from the edge, giving them space, as the creature's clawed hands appeared at the cliff top, followed by his elongated muzzle and his amber eyes. Those eyes locked with mine as he carefully set Punch down on solid ground. Up close I could see details that I'd missed before. The silver strands mixed with the gray of his fur, the intelligent awareness in his gaze, the gentle way his hands moved as he checked Punch for injuries before releasing him. My dog immediately rushed to me, pressing his body against my legs as I shakily stood. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." The dogman rose to his full height, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and tilted his head slightly. He made no sound, but his eyes conveyed understanding. There was something profoundly ancient in that gaze, something that made me feel like I was being truly seen, for maybe the first time in my life. I reached out a trembling hand, not sure what I intended, maybe just a human gesture of gratitude. The dogman looked at my outstretched fingers with curious intensity, but made no move to bridge the gap between us. That's when I heard them. Voices shouting, and the sound of running feet crashing through the underbrush. The peaceful moment shattered as several teenagers from the party emerged from the trees behind me. "Holy crap," someone yelled. "What the hell is that thing?" The dogman's ears flattened against his head, his posture instantly shifting from relaxed to alert. His amber eyes darted from me to the growing crowd of shocked faces, his nostrils flaring as he assessed the new threat. "Wait," I began, turning toward the others. "He just saved my dog." But I never finished the sentence. A stone whizzed past my ear, followed by another that struck the dogman on the shoulder. He flinched but made no sound of pain. "Get away from her," Travis shouted at the dogman, already bending to grab another rock. "Stop it," I screamed, stepping between them and the dogman. "He rescued Punch. He climbed down the cliff and he saved Punch's life." But fear had already taken hold. More teenagers arrived, their alcohol-fueled courage manifesting as aggression towards something they didn't understand. Stones and sticks flew through the air as shouts of monster and freak drowned out my protests. Behind me I heard a soft rumble, not quite a growl, but a sound of resignation. When I turned, the dogman was already retreating, moving backwards on all fours toward the cliff edge. Our eyes met one final time, and I saw in his gaze not anger, but a profound sadness, as if this reaction was exactly what he had expected. "I'm sorry," I whispered, clutching Punch tightly as tears blurred my vision. The dogman gave a nearly imperceptible nod, and then with graceful deliberation, he turned and disappeared down the cliff. Unlike Punch's chaotic tumble, this was a controlled descent, the creature finding handholds invisible to human eyes as he vanished from sight, returning to whatever hidden world existed in the crevices of Shaunie's ancient rock formations. The barrage of projectiles ceased as soon as he was gone, replaced by excited chatter and wild speculation. Someone grabbed my arm, asking if I was hurt, if the werewolf had attacked me. I pulled away, sick with the realization that they hadn't seen what I had seen, a sentient being performing an act of pure compassion, now driven back into hiding by those who should have shown gratitude. I didn't stay for the rest of the celebration. I mean, how could I? The triumph of their victory over the dogman turned my stomach. Travis kept his arm around my shoulder as he guided me back toward the main gathering, mistaking my silence for shock, my tears for gratitude at being rescued from the dogman. "You're safe now," he said, squeezing me closer. "That thing could have torn you apart." I shrugged away from him, clutching Punch's leash tightly. My dog stayed unusually close to my legs, as if sensing my distress. Or maybe he, too, was mourning the treatment of his rescuer. "It wasn't attacking me," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "It saved Punch from falling. You didn't see what I saw." The word spread through the party like wildfire. By the time we reached the main gathering, I had been transformed from quiet girl with a weird dog to girl who survived a monster attack. People who'd never spoken to me before suddenly wanted details, their eyes wide with morbid fascination. Did it have red eyes? Did it howl? I heard my cousin's friend saw one of those things near Old Miller Road last year. The questions blurred together as I sat on a log, one hand buried in Punch's fur, trying to process what had actually happened versus the story being created around me. Some claimed they had driven it off with their bravery. Others speculated it had been stalking the party, waiting to pick someone off. A few even suggested it hypnotized me somehow, that I was defending it because I was under its spell. Not one of them, not a single person, considered the possibility that they had been the aggressors, that they had driven away something that they should have tried to understand. When my friend Brett approached with his video camera asking if I'd reenact my escape for his graduation video project, I had had enough. I stood up, pulling Punch's leash tight. "I'm leaving," I announced to no one in particular. "Come on," Travis said, reaching for my arm. "Don't let this ruin the day. We're keeping watch. It won't come back." I looked at his face. Handsome, concerned, completely oblivious to the truth of what had happened, and realized the crush I had harbored all year had evaporated in the space of 20 minutes. "That's exactly the problem," I said. "He won't come back." The drive home was silent, except for Punch's occasional sighs from the passenger seat. I stroked his head at stoplights, reassuring myself that he was really safe. Not thanks to any of them. Not thanks to me either, but thanks to a creature that had been driven away with hatred born of ignorance. Thanks to the Pennsylvania Dogman. He's not just any kind of John. This one's named John Carnagon. Please join me in thanking tonight's executive producer, John Carnagon, for making this episode possible. John donated to us through YouTube and is also a member of our PayPal channel club at peterbernard.com. Oh, all channel members should know that we are working on some brand new secret members-only Dogman stories, which we're hoping to start dropping at the end of this week. The Dogman's Mercy. Dear Scary Stories, NYC. I saw a dogman once. It might have saved my life. This all happened after I had managed to drive my car into a tree one night. The cold metal bit into my skin as I hung suspended in the driver's seat, the seatbelt cutting across my chest like a knife. Smoke curled through the crumpled interior of my car, stinging my eyes and burning my lungs. Through the spiderweb cracks of the windshield, I could see the massive tree trunk that had stopped my vehicle with brutal finality. Pain radiated from places I didn't know could hurt, and I found myself reaching up to touch the roof of the car that was now below me. My car had flipped. I was upside down, and I was not going to survive. I tried to move and I screamed as white-hot agony shot through my legs. Something was terribly wrong with them. Trapped, perhaps broken. The dashboard had collapsed inward, pinning me in place. The driver's side door was crushed beyond recognition. There was no way out. "Help," I whispered, although I knew no one could possibly hear me on this deserted country road at midnight. "Please, somebody help me." I found myself praying. The words felt foreign on my tongue. I hadn't asked for help, not truly, in years. Not since I was a child, kneeling beside my bed with small hands pressed together, reciting prayers my grandmother had taught me. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. The smoke was getting thicker. A new fear gripped me. Fire. If that gas tank ignited... "Please," I whispered again, and this time it wasn't addressed to any passing stranger who might miraculously appear. This time it was an overt prayer, the first one I'd uttered in over 20 years. "I don't want it to end like this," I said. "Please help me." Something moved outside the car, a shadow darker than the night itself. I blinked away tears and blood, straining to see through the ruined windshield. At first I thought my oxygen-deprived brain was hallucinating as the massive shape approached. It moved like a man, but stood far taller than any human I'd ever seen, with a broad chest and powerful limbs. Then, it stepped into the splash of my one remaining headlight, and I saw its face. It was a dog. No, not quite a dog. Something between canine and human, with intelligent eyes that reflected gold in the light. Its muzzle was long. Its ears were pointed, covered in dark fur that gleamed like midnight. But its expression was unmistakably compassionate, almost human in its concern. It probably would have been wiser if I were terrified. Instead, an inexplicable calm washed over me. This creature, this Dogman, bent down to peer into the wreckage. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was seeing something beyond ordinary reality. Something sacred, something ancient. With hands that were somehow both paw-like and dexterous, he began tearing at the crumpled metal of my car door. The sound was horrible, screeching, grinding, but the strength behind it was miraculous. Metal gave way like paper beneath his power. When he reached in and gently unbuckled my seatbelt, supporting my weight so I wouldn't crash into the roof, I felt no fear. I felt only gratitude. His fur was soft against my skin as he carefully extracted me from the wreckage, mindful of my injuries in a way that seemed impossibly thoughtful. "Thank you," I managed to whisper as he cradled me against his chest. "Who are you? What are you?" He made no sound, but his eyes, those impossibly wise eyes, seemed to see straight through to my soul. With infinite care, he carried me away from the smoking vehicle, and he laid me down on the soft grass by the roadside. Then he settled beside me, a silent guardian watching over me in my most vulnerable moment. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time seemed meaningless. My pain faded to a distant throb as I drifted in and out of consciousness. Once I thought I heard that Dogman make a sound, a soft whine, that somehow conveyed more emotion than words ever could. The last thing I remember out there was the approach of headlights and the Dogman rising to his feet. I reached out weakly, wanting to ask him to stay, but my strength was gone. As voices approached and flashlight beams cut through the darkness, the Dogman slipped away into the night, leaving nothing but disturbed grass where he had sat. "Over here, we've got a live one," someone shouted, and then hands were touching me, human hands, checking for a pulse. Darkness claimed me completely. I woke to the steady beep of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell that seems universal to all medical facilities. For a moment I was disoriented, unable to remember how I had gotten there. And then the memories crashed back. The accident, the pain, and the angel Dogman. "She's awake," a nurse called out, and suddenly my room was full of activity. Doctors checking vitals, adjusting IVs, shining lights in my eyes. "What happened?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. "You were in a serious car accident," a doctor explained, her face serious but kind. "Your car hit a tree. You're suffering multiple fractures in both legs, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a moderate concussion. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky wasn't the word I would have chosen. Blessed, perhaps, or maybe protected. "How did I get out?" I asked. "That car was crushed." The doctor exchanged glances with the nurse. "You were found on the side of the road about 15 feet from your vehicle. The first responders assumed you had managed to crawl clear before losing consciousness." I shook my head, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "That's not possible. My legs were trapped. I was upside down, strapped in, and I couldn't move." "Trauma can affect memory," the doctor said gently. "It's common to have confused recollections after an accident like yours." "No," I insisted. "It was the Dogman. He was who pulled me out." Another glance between the medical staff, this one laden with concern. "The dog angel," the nurse said carefully. "Yes, you were talking about the dog angel when the paramedics brought you in. We thought it might be the medication or the shock." "He was real," I said, suddenly desperate to make them understand. "He was tall, taller than any man, with a dog's head, but standing upright. He tore the car door open, and he carried me to safety." The doctor patted my hand. "Your imagination may have created a protector to help you cope with the trauma. Don't worry, that's actually a healthy psychological response." But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. The Dogman's fur against my skin. The strength in his arms as he carried me. The compassion in his eyes. Yet as days turned into weeks in the hospital, doubt began to creep in. Everyone, the doctors, the nurses, my few friends who visited, they all listened to my story with the same polite skepticism. They never outright called me delusional, but their disbelief was evident in their careful responses and concerned expressions. Only one question remained unanswered, even by those skeptics. Who or what had pulled me from the wreckage? The police report confirmed that the driver's side door had been torn open with force that seemed inconsistent with available tools. And there was no first responder taking credit for that extraction either. The first people on the scene, an elderly couple driving from their daughter's house, swore I was already lying by the roadside when they found me. So if not the Dogman, the dog angel, then who? And there was another mystery that plagued my thoughts during those long hospital days. The strange man who had caused me to swerve in the first place. I remember him somewhat clearly, jumping into the road so suddenly I had no time to brake. But there had been something odd about him that I wasn't sure about. There was something just not quite right. His proportions were wrong somehow. His movements were jerky and unnatural. And his eyes, I remember thinking they reflected the light like an animal's. Was he real? Was he somehow connected to the Dogman? These questions circled endlessly in my mind as I began the grueling process of physical therapy. The prognosis was not good. The damage to my legs was severe. Multiple compound fractures, nerve damage, and muscle trauma. The doctors were careful not to make any promises, but their guarded optimism barely concealed their doubts about whether I would walk normally again. "We'll take it one day at a time," my physical therapist Marcus would say, as he helped me through excruciating exercises designed to maintain what little mobility I had left. The pain was constant, a vicious companion that never left my side. There were days I wanted to give up, or I wanted to accept that I would be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Days when the effort seemed pointless, and the pain too great to bear. On those days I would close my eyes and see the Dogman again, his compassionate gaze, his gentle strength. Whether he was real or a figment of my traumatized mind, the memory gave me courage. If he had saved me from death, I couldn't waste the life he had preserved. The memory of him also reminded me that prayer might sometimes work, so I returned to praying. 6 months after the accident, I took my first unassisted step. It was small, a mere shifting of weight from the parallel bars to my own damaged legs for just a moment. But Marcus whooped with joy as if I'd run a marathon. "I told you," he said, his face split by a wide grin. "You're gonna prove all these pessimistic doctors wrong." That night, I dreamt of the Dogman for the first time since the accident. In the dream, he stood at the edge of a forest, watching me with those intelligent eyes. He made no move to approach, but somehow I understood he was waiting for me to be strong enough to find him again. I woke with tears on my face and a new determination in my heart. The next year was a blur of physical therapy, surgeries, and painfully slow progress. I did learn to walk again, first with a walker, then with crutches, and finally with just a cane. Each step was a victory, each setback a temporary obstacle rather than a total defeat. Through it all, the mystery of the Dogman drove me forward. I began researching, scouring the internet for similar sightings, for legends of dog-headed beings who intervened in moments of crisis. I found more than I expected. Ancient Egyptian deities with canine features, the medieval tales of the cynocephaly, modern cryptid sightings from around the world. None matched exactly what I had seen and been through, but taken together, they suggested I wasn't the first to encounter such a being. That perhaps, throughout human history, these guardians had appeared to those in desperate need, like myself. 2 years after the accident, I returned to the crash site for the first time. My legs were stronger now, though I still walked with a pronounced limp, and I needed my cane on uneven ground. The tree that had stopped my car still bore the scar of impact, a deep gash in its ancient trunk. Standing before it, I felt a strange mixture of fear and gratitude. This place had nearly been my end. Instead, it had become a new beginning. I walked slowly along the roadside until I found a spot, the spot, where I believed the Dogman had laid me down. Nothing marked it as special, just grass and wildflowers growing undisturbed. Yet standing there, I somehow felt a presence, a watchfulness that raised the hair on my arms. "I know you're real," I said aloud to the empty air, "and I know you saved me. I just want to understand why." Only silence answered me, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A strange track pressed into a patch of soft earth, half hidden by tall grass. It wasn't quite a paw print, but neither was it a human footprint either. Something in between. Something impossible. I didn't tell anyone about that print. Some mysteries I was learning were personal, meant only for those who had experienced them. 3 years after the accident, I was finally able to return to work. My life resumed a semblance of normalcy, although I was forever changed. The pain never fully left, becoming instead a constant reminder of my fragility and my strength. And still I wondered about that strange man who had caused the accident. Had he been another supernatural being, a malevolent counterpart to my canine savior, or just a homeless person in the wrong place in the wrong time? I'll never know. Sometimes on nights when the weather's clear, I would drive out to that lonely stretch of road. I never saw the Dogman again, but sometimes, if I was very still and very quiet, I would feel that watchful presence. And on those nights, I would whisper my gratitude into the darkness, believing that somehow, maybe, he could hear me. 5 years after the accident, I finally accepted that some questions have no answers. The Dogman remains a mystery, whether guardian angel or a cryptid or figment of my imagination brought to life by desperate need and my neurochemicals in my brain. But one thing I knew and know with absolute certainty, that night changed me. The woman who swerved to avoid a strange figure on a dark road died in that crash. The woman who emerged, broken, healing, forever marked by pain and wonder. That person is me, and that person is someone new. Someone who believes in mysteries. Someone who had rediscovered faith. Not in any organized religion, but in the possibility that there are forces in this world beyond our understanding. Guardians that walk between worlds, appearing where needed most. Now I'm someone who's been touched by mercy in the form of the Dogman.
Aroo! It's the Dogman. Aroo! Now he's here. Aroo! It's the Dogman. May is his time of year. This year it's May Day all month long on Scary Stories NYC. An entire month of Dogman distress signals. All May we're presenting allegedly true tales of Dogman and werewolf-type creatures helping human beings. Could it be true that the Dogman is not all bad? Find out May Day May on Scary Stories NYC.
She won't be bad, you just can't make her. I'm talking about today's EP, Crystal Baker. Please join me in welcoming our newest PayPal Club member, Crystal Baker, for making this episode possible. Crystal joined our channel memberships at peterbernard.com, so she gets to see our secret, uncensored Dogman episodes that the public never gets to see. If you'd like to see them too, like today's hero, Crystal Baker, then listen to what this next little guy has to say. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.